Hello and welcome to Love and Flowers and You with Dr. Jennifer Love in Los Angeles, Dr. Michelle Flowers in Chicago, and I'm international journalist Marina Hutchinson in Atlanta. Dr. Love and Dr. Flowers are medical doctors who have more than 30 combined years of practice as psychiatrists. They have worked with thousands of patients in their busy practices. With my journalistic guidance, they hope to share what they have learned with others who may not have the time, money, or access to speak with a top expert. This show is not intended to provide medical advice. It is a place for learning about and sharing the human experience, a place where you will learn, laugh, and be inspired to become your best self. In their offices, Michelle and Jennifer are physicians. Here they are, your friends. And today, gals, we've decided we're going to be talking about how to live with unhappy people. So, Michelle, we'll start with you since it was your friend that asked us to talk about this.
Yeah, I'm loving having people ask the questions and give us the topics. So this week's topic is I am finding it hard to maintain my happiness when the people around me that live in my home or the people that I'm working with are perpetually unhappy. So what should I do about that?
And what was your initial advice? Do you want to start with your initial advice to her and in general to people?
So one of the things that Jennifer and I have talked about is it sort of depends, right? If this is a permanent situation, or are you just you ended up at a social event in a meeting and it's going to be an hour that you're with these unhappy people, or is it going to be the rest of your life that you're with these unhappy people? And then the strategies change.
Very different podcasts.
Well, but I'm sure for the person that asked you, because she asked about living with unhappy people, it is actually a question of the perpetual, eternal being surrounded by unhappiness or criticism. So, Jennifer, what are your thoughts on how does if that's not just a meeting or just somebody at work, it's somebody that you live with?
Right. Well, and again, there's kind of different categories. Are we talking about a partner? Or are we talking about a child? We'll have very different approaches. And we sometimes have these chronic conditions where people aren't themselves. You know, if someone's having, a cancer, and they are going to be on this chronic journey of, it could be 6 months or it could be a year or it could be longer, but or if someone is pregnant and they're having, a difficult pregnancy, it may be time limited, but you may be living with someone who, for whatever reason, is going through kind of a funk. I think we could do a whole podcast series of what to do if your partner is permanently funked. And, how do you deal with that? I think, though, kind of the heart of what we're jumping into today is more when the people around you are kind of becoming more pessimistic or aren't happy in their life circumstances. How do you then maintain your own sense of self and your own happiness?
Michelle, your ideas on what does a person do in that situation?
One of my favorite practices to start with is something called loving kindness meditation. And Jennifer has a quote for us from the Dalai Lama. I'll wait for her to give that.
Well, Michelle and I were talking earlier, and she's talking about loving kindness, and my brain goes in a different way when I'm around someone who's really difficult. Let's say in my office, someone who's incredibly narcissistic, who is fabulous and I'm the worst, or someone who's really grumpy or kind of coming at me. I think about compassion, and, I will do better with my time around this person if I'm compassionate about how that person got to this spot. And so with my patients, I'm thinking, okay, this is someone whose mother abandoned him, or this is someone who had an alcoholic parent, or this is someone who's incredibly depressed. And so, a lot of times we take this negativity personally, but it's really, for me, compassion is what came into my mind. And so the Dalai Lama has said something that has been really kind of impactful for me. He says, if you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion. And there's two things about that I love. One is it's a practice. It's not just being something. You have to practice compassion. Just like I talked about in a few podcasts ago about practicing being kind. And it's not just something you automatically achieve. But I love that it's the idea that when you practice compassion, it changes the people around you and it changes you. So it's targeting not only the person who is struggling with their unhappiness, but it's also bolstering you as well.
So how does that work, practicing compassion, when sometimes people are saying negative things to you, like critical things? Like today I was told by my mom, who just came to visit, the first thing she noticed is, oh, your yard's the only one that doesn't have the leaves blown. I'm like, yeah, that's right. But like, is that all you notice? So
right.
It irritated me. So how do you go into that, I'm going to practice compassion mode?
If I was your psychiatrist, I would have been advising you probably for 3 weeks up to this visit, because
the mother preparation.
Right. Your mom didn't get off the plane and criticize you, and you were like, wow, that's really unlike her. Usually she's so complimentary of everything. This is a long-standing pattern, and every one of us probably has a family member. My grandmother was an expert at the backhanded compliment, like, oh, you look nice in those jeans. And I'm like, oh yeah, it's because they're black, and it was always she was a master at the backhanded compliment. But if you are prepared for that, and you know that it's about that person, Jennifer said this thing where practicing compassion puts you in that person's shoes and takes you out of your own self-referential viewpoint. Like, why would this person hurt me? They're not intentionally hurting you. Most of the time, they're not intentionally hurting you. And so to extend compassion is also to put yourself in a bubble of protection.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yep, that is very interesting. Okay, so how do you do that? Because usually what I just ignore it, and I think this is precious time I have with her that I will not have maybe in a couple of years, so I try to ignore it. So how would somebody prepare for a critical or negative person that's going to be around them? Just ignore it? I mean, is putting the bubble ignoring?
You can't ignore it. You can give yourself something else to do. So 3 weeks before your mother came into town, or maybe 3 months before your mother came into town, or whoever it is that you're dealing with, particularly in this situation where it's a visit that you have to get through, then you could start either a loving kindness meditation, or I also love the prayer of St. Francis of Assisi, right? Which is, Lord, make me an instrument of peace. Where there's hatred, let me sow love. Where there's injury, pardon. Right? Where there's doubt, faith, where there's sadness, joy, it goes on. The idea is that you are trying to be the peace. You are trying to be the channel of peace. And in Buddhist philosophy, there's something called loving kindness meditation. And there is a fabulous book out now called A Fearless Heart by Thupten Jinpa. Sorry for the
show us the book. You want to show it to us, or you have it?
It's a red book, and it's beautiful, and it is a fearless heart, and it is jam-packed with loving kindness exercises. And one of the things that I really love is an exercise called Just Like Me, right? Where you begin to think of a person that's giving you difficulty, and you think, okay, just like me, this person wishes to be free from suffering. Just like me, this person would like to feel love. And I think you can extend that and think of all the other ways this person is just like you if you're having a hard time extending that compassion.
And what's your advice, Jennifer?
I think of the context and the person. So, not knowing you and not knowing your mom and that long-standing dynamic, although you have mentioned several times before on this podcast that when you were on CNN, your mom would give you running commentary on your appearance. Yeah. So I know from just listening to you on our own podcast that there's some kind of pattern. And for me, I, ask my favorite question, which is why. And is there something, sometimes when my patients come in and they're throwing kind of stinging comments. They're making people around them sting because they've felt stung.
Mm-hmm.
And so my job in that moment isn't to feel stung, but to recognize that my interaction with them is the same as the interaction they have when they go to the post office or when they're at school or when they're at home. And so how can I make this a moment that isn't actually about me at all, that is about this person who's acting out this way? Now, you, Marina, are not a psychiatrist, right? You are just, you're extraordinarily brilliant and well thought through, but it isn't really going to be up to you to like analyze your mom and figure out why she's doing that. It's really about dealing with it. And I think that a lot of how we feel is what our eyes are on. And, I love, I live out here in California, and I love going to the beach. I love watching the sunset at night. I love watching the sun reflect on the ocean. And then as the sun sets and the colors change in the sky, like it is mesmerizing, and it calms me because my eyes are on it. Yeah. I, on the other hand, had to stop watching Law and Order because I was having nightmares. I was feeling tense. So the things that we watch, the things we have our eyes on, have a lot to do with how we feel. And so this really gets into something we refer to in psychiatry as the positivity negativity bias. Is my brain enhancing things in my environment that are positive, or is it magnifying the things that are negative? And so if you are particularly sensitive to your mom's criticism, then you may be picking those things out like that's the only thing going on. And your brain may be missing all these beautiful moments of, wow, my mom is here and she's, cuddling my dog, and she's playing with my kids, and she's cooking with us, and
cooking, yeah.
Cleaning, and all those things that moms do. And so one of the things that anyone can do is kind of check that internal thought process. Am I choosing to see, or that's not really a choice. You're not choosing to see, but it's something that's
like you said, is my brain just picking out those things and not giving as much value to the other things and getting
right.
Like I feel sometimes it's like, it takes me off track. But I love also, Michelle, what you were saying, and I don't know if you told your friend this as far as advice, but kind of you have to balance time with people that are, making you unhappy or say things that put you in an unhappy place. Because I wonder how much information you can tell us about your friend's situation and what guidance she was giving you of what exactly she wanted to have answered.
Well, I think we all have multiple friends in this situation. And I personally have been in this situation on a number of occasions, whether it's with, every once in a while, there's a challenging patient that, is coming into the office, and you see that person on your schedule and you're like, I don't know if I have everything that person needs, which is very frustrating for me because I want to be able to be there for people completely and fully in every way that they need me to be there for them. Mm-hmm. Obviously I fail on that all the time.
Beyond the kind of diagnosis or the job description of a
right.
psychiatrist, right?
So it caused, and I look at that and I think, is that person, am I going to catch that unhappiness? Is it just going to be so pervasive and so heavy, and there won't be anything that can be done to lift it? Or is this a situation where you just need to be with someone, but you can't do that all day, every day with, the people in your work and the people in your home. So if you're 80% surrounded by negative people, then, one of the things to look at is where am I finding people? Where might some positive people be? Where was the last place I was when someone smiled at me and gave me a really good, spend more time there.
Yes, that's such great advice. That is such great advice.
Because if you're energized and complete in relationships, in most of the relationships around you, then you can handle these momentary things, and you have more compassion to extend, I think.
Yeah, I think it's great to think of where are those places where I'm happy. But in situations where people find themselves that they live with someone who is unhappy, and that was your question, how do you live with an unhappy person? Other thoughts on that?
Well, what I think, I mean, you are in control of what goes on inside of your head. No one else is. And the power of how we feel comes in how we think. So if you are living or around someone who's unhappy and you are starting to feel dragged into that, if you want to change the way you feel, you need to change how you think. And you have to start by paying attention to your thoughts and paying attention to, am I having more of a negative running commentary going through my mind? You are in control of changing that. Am I playing the same record over and over and over again? You are in charge of changing that record, and you are empowered to do that. And sometimes when we get so exhausted, we feel like all these things are coming at us and that we don't have the control over these things, when in the reality is we control everything that goes on inside of our minds. And we have the power to work on shifting our bias and thinking from things that are more negative into things that are more positive. And so that makes it easier to partner with someone who's going, let's say, through a really difficult time and maybe grumpy or more negative. And rather than you becoming grumpy and negative, understanding that and being able to keep your own internal focus on track, but being able to be there and support that other person.
Yeah, and I love what you guys were saying before about, what your eyes are focused on. So it's the same thing about being positive, and your thoughts then go to that other place. So I know one thing that always helps me in difficult times I've gone through, pictures of my kids. They really, really, I don't know, I just look at them. I'm like, that's so awesome. And the other day someone was saying, oh, what was the best part of your day? I said, it was kissing my son good morning when he was sleeping still in the morning. And that whole idea of not caring what people think. And sometimes that's what makes you feel negative when an unhappy person is around, because you kind of care about how they feel, or you care about what they're thinking. And when they've told you something negative, that makes you feel negative. So again, to your point, Jennifer, you have to reprogram your brain to focus on a positive, kind of just dust it away.
Right. And you can't, when we talk about compassion, that doesn't mean ignoring what is. Practicing compassion is naming what it is and choosing to be compassionate about it anyway. So it doesn't mean that you have to ignore a certain behavior, or if someone is kind of coming at you, you don't need to ignore it at all. You can name it. You can know what it is. And then you can kind of choose to respond. I mean, that's what really practicing compassion is. It's not pretending that the negative thing doesn't exist.
But also it's always, I think, I think often our human nature is just to feel bad when something, it's like a cloud that comes over you, feel bad when negativity is around. So it's really kind of a skill you have to develop of training your brain. Okay, this is something negative that's told me, it's put me in a funk, but I'm going to flip a switch and I'm going to go back to my sunny, positive self.
Well, it's practice, right? And we wouldn't have to practice it if it were easy. And it's, if you have, let's say with your relationship with your mom, this is an ongoing relationship. And so you can start practicing your compassion with her. And you won't be perfect on the first visit, and maybe the next visit and the next visit. And you can pay attention to what your thoughts are and what you're paying attention to. And that starts changing how you feel. And what's interesting about that is when we change the way we feel, our attitude, we start emitting like a different energy. And I don't mean to sound like some kind of hippie spiritual guru with this, but really, if I'm in a funk, the people around me are going to sense that. And if I'm feeling good, the people around me are going to sense that. And then those people can start feeding off of that. And you actually have the power, I talk about a lot, this ripple effect, that when you change your behavior or change your attitude and become more positive, that can have a ripple effect to the people around you. That can, whether it's your coworkers or family members. And so you may be surprised to find that may change the way that they're interacting with you as well.
In fact, that makes me think of one of my favorite quotes. We talked about, we bring quotes. I have them in my head, but one of my favorite quotes, and I actually have it framed in my house somewhere, and it says, no matter where you go and no matter what the weather, bring your own sunshine. So I think that is such a good idea to think about, that your energy emanates from you, and people enjoy being around positive people. So just, slap yourself and just say, back to me, back to being happy. Just put it in another compartment, and make it smaller. Instead of making, like you said, it's a big thing, just kind of shrink it down and put it aside, and give it its just warrant. Don't over exaggerate it. And now that you guys have discussed it, I think that's exactly what I was doing. I was just looking at the little and not looking at the big.
Like you even said, you as soon as we prompted you, you came up with the cooking and the cleaning. But
Yeah.
Jennifer touched on something very early, that this is a practice. It's not something that most people can do, pinch themselves or, give a little tap somewhere and just switch back into their negative or into their positive sunshiny self.
Yeah.
It is our human default setting to pick out what's wrong. And that makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint, but you have to understand how it doesn't serve you in the modern world and in relationship. And so if you find any type of prayer, or because Jennifer doesn't want to be the hippie, I'm the hippie here, right? There's only room for one hippie. So you find this prayer, or you find this loving kindness practice, or you find a meditation, or you find, whatever it is, a cognitive behavioral therapy exercise that works for you, to sit down and write down your thoughts and then say, how true is that? Is that really true? Is there something else that could also be true that doesn't make me feel as bad? But it requires an investment of time. And if you start to measure yourself, before you ask anybody else to change, just in your calendar, start keeping track of how many times you're noticing something negative versus being kind to other people. And if you're doing a stellar job, like you're 90% positive and emanating positivity, and not a critical person, but a grateful person, then I think you'll find that people around you are much less negative.
I love that advice. Jennifer, did you want to say?
As Michelle's talking, I'm thinking of this kind of embarrassing story about myself that I'm going to share with you. But
Yay! I love when you share stories.
Yeah. So years ago, when I was in my residency, and Michelle will know this, but residency sucks. And back in the day, they made a law saying the maximum number of hours you can work is 80 hours a week. And we weren't even staying in that at all, right? So you're working at least 100 hours a week, and then you have to go home and study for your boards and all this stuff. And so you're overworked. And I think at that point in my life, I was making like $1 an hour, and I was a doctor, and it's ridiculous. But I was in a particular situation where I had come in as an intern, and there were some people in the classes ahead of us, and the structure works, I was in a 4-year residency program. And so the upper level residents train the younger level residents. And when we came in, there had been some fighting amongst the years ahead of us, in the year before we got there. And so we kind of came into this really negative environment. And what I found is just kind of being a part of that and being around that as my internship went on, and then into kind of my second year, that I was feeling rotten, that I was feeling kind of pessimistic, that I had lost touch with my internal joy. And it wasn't just at work, which makes sense. People around me are nasty. It's just a bad place. Let me get home. But my attitude followed me wherever I was. And so I started feeling awful. And so I thought to myself one day, well, you are a psychiatrist. Like, you can fix this. You have the tools. And the first thought that went through my head was, great. I work on people all day long, and now I have to come and work on myself. And there was this really negative thought I had. And so I just thought, okay, this is kind of an emergency situation. What would I do? How can I make this not work? So I thought, well, what would I do if I really needed to, talk to a kid about being more optimistic? as opposed to pessimistic. And so I invented these little characters, and I thought, what, if I were writing like a children's book or something. And they were little friends, and it was Optimouse and Pessimus. These words are a little embarrassing.
I like that.
I
Right?
love it.
So it wasn't, I'll just tell you, a decade later, I'm like telling a patient of mine this, and she interrupts and says, oh, it's so funny how the optimistic one was the tiny mouse and the pessimistic one was a giant moose. And I was like, I didn't even notice that. That's where my brain was, that even in this cartoon I was creating in my head, this giant moose was a pessimistic one and the optimistic one was this tiny mouse. But I thought they could go on these little adventures together, and I never ended up writing that book. Maybe we'll get there one day. But what I did is I wore around, these kind of Optimus and Pessimist characters, and what would they think and what would they do? And I would think then in a situation, oh, am I being an Optimus? And what I did that for me worked was I told some of my colleagues what I was working on. And some of them were pediatricians who were going to specialize in child adolescent psychiatry. So we're all hanging out one day, and I don't know what happened. I was complaining about something, and did you know that, whatever it was. And one of my colleagues wheels over in his little office chair on the wheels and sits on my desk and just strokes his beard and just says, "Doctor, are you being a pessimist?" And like everyone that was there, we just all burst out laughing, and I did too, right? And so I realized at that point that by sharing that with them, I created a way to get feedback that didn't feel judgmental. Because if he had said to me, you know what, Jennifer, you are being so negative. You are really bringing us down. You have the worst attitude. I would have said, no shit, Sherlock. Like, of course, did you hear what I just said? This and this just happened. Of course. When it came over and said, are you being a pessimist? We all laughed, and it gave me the chance to use the humor to reset my internal attitude. And so we have to find ways, I think, of working on ourselves that aren't judgmental. Shame is like my middle name. I blame myself for everything. I internalize everything, and then I automatically feel guilty. That doesn't serve me any purpose. So we have to look at ways that we can kind of be lighthearted about, our human experiences and how we think and how we feel and how we interact. So for me, Optimus and Pessimus, as silly as it is to admit, as a grown woman, I'm thinking about this giant moose and this little mouse, having conversations in my head. I sound like I need a psychiatrist, but things like that can be really helpful.
Michelle, you were like waving. What were you?
I'm just so, it resonates with me so strongly. I feel the importance of what Jennifer is saying here, in that way to invite feedback that doesn't make you feel judged, and the importance of humor in that. And I don't think it can be understated, and we forget sometimes. And I do this in my work with families all the time, come up with like a little saying like, are you being a pessimist? Or that most of the time can snap you out of that limbic system in your brain trap that says, I'm in danger, I'm being judged, I need to defend myself, that ego place too. And you can just snap out of it. When I was a child, my mother used to do this thing, and I hated it, and now I do it to my children. When they're pouting or in a funk, my mom would say, I see Mr. Smiley Face. Just like that, right? And it was unbelievable that no matter how angry or what the bad mood was, you couldn't hold it, because she was all of a sudden being incredibly silly, and we had gone from being serious and arguing or whatever to just all of a sudden being lighthearted.
Any last thoughts? We're running out of time for this episode of Love and Flowers and You. We're good?
I think just good luck, and remember that it's a practice. Be easy on yourself, and it will come. And you're in charge of what goes on inside of your head.
Awesome. Well, looking forward, I really enjoyed this. It's really, when you talk about spending time with positive people, you Jennifer and Michelle are definitely some of the world's most positive. So love, love, love that I can share time with you, and that the audience gets to share time with you too. So to our audience, please send us your questions. Thanks for joining us, and join us for our next episode of Love and Flowers and You.
And if you have any questions on this topic or others you want answers or possible solutions for, email us at loveandflowersandyou@gmail.com. So it is all spelled out. Love, L-O-V-E, and A-N-D, flowers, and you at gmail.com. loveandflowersandyou@gmail.com. That's the email. And please don't forget to subscribe and download the podcast so you don't miss out on any of this life-transforming information. Tune in to our next episode as Michelle and Jennifer continue guiding you to discover your own light and give you the tools on your path to a more fulfilling life.